Well, if you stumbled this far into the dark reaches of the interwebs and actually clicked on this video to learn the most obscure of obscure fiddle tunes, let me assure you, you might be one of the most hippest mandolin players out there, because this advanced bluegrass fiddle tune is about as hip as they get. Don't believe me? Check it out. Well, it may not be the hippest tune, but the Snowflake Reel definitely has some interesting twists and turns to it, right? I mean, listen to that B section. Who thought it was a good idea to put that glaring B flat chord in this innocent little D major tune? And honestly, I don't know too much about the origins of this fiddle tune other than its alleged Texas fiddle style heritage, but I do know that there have been some really great recordings of this one under the alter ego Snowflake Breakdown, which in my opinion is kind of a lamer title. But that's the title that legendary bluegrass fiddle player Bobby Hicks used on his 1978 record Texas Crapshooter, which is an amazing track, by the way. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, you can hear Sam Bush playing mandolin on this one. And Bobby's version definitely has kind of more of a vintage Texas fiddle style feel to it, but since then the Snowflake Reel has come to be known more as a progressive tune. You can hear some really hip and modern versions of this one by Ross Martin and Grant Gordy on their duo record. Also, that young instrumental powerhouse group Section House has a version of this too. They're both really imaginative and really improvisatory versions of this song. By the way, I've got links to all these recordings below in the description. Be sure to give a listen to all these. I think a big part of why this tune has become such an unsung hero of the modern fiddle tune movement is really because of that little B flat chord that you have in the B section. Otherwise, this is a pretty nondescript two-part fiddle tune in the key of D, but for those two measures where we have that B flat chord, we're thrown into an alarmingly different key than our starting place. What this means for us is that we're gonna have to dig a little bit deeper into the theory and technique of what's going on here to have the correct tools necessary to improvise over this tune. And yeah, we're gonna be doing some improvising here by the end of this video, and I think it's totally fine to cut loose on a tune like this because the chords are so wacky, the melody's so twisty and almost not very memorable, so it's fun to put our own stamp on it. So we'll start out by learning that melody and the chords, and then we're gonna take a deep dive into the scales and the arpeggios that we probably wanna use when improvising here. And just a heads up, this is going to be a really nerdy lesson video, but nerdy is the new hip in my book, and if you think so too, you know the drill. Hit like, hit subscribe, and let's play some mandolin. So let's dive straight into the melody here, and we'll learn the chords as we go along. And for this A section here, there's actually not a whole lot to watch out for, but for some reason, I just have a lot of trouble remembering this melody. By the way, if you're having trouble learning this melody too, you can always grab the PDF transcriptions and the play along tracks over at my Patreon page at the link above. That could be helpful learning tools as you go through this video. I think part of the reason why this melody is so amorphous and it's hard to get into our brains is because there's a really big register here in this A section. We have a note as high as our 5th fret on our E string, which is an A note, and then we go all the way down to the low A note, that's the 2nd fret on your G string as well. Also, the melody is kind of based around these arpeggio ideas, so it's not a real hummable or singable melody to start with. But like I mentioned, this tune does just have standard 8-measure sections, and those sections break down into 2-measure chunks like they usually do, so I say we just have to double down and beat this silly melody into our heads. And as you learn this, try to think about how the melody lines up with the chords, which are actually really simple for this A section, right? We're in the key of D here, and we just have 2 chords. We have our D major and our A major, and we just go back and forth between those 2 chords a couple times. But just a couple thoughts about the embellishments here in this melody. So to start off on the downbeat, we're playing a hammer-on from the open string to our 2nd fret on our E string, no problem, right? But next we've got this slide between the 3rd and the 4th bars here that we'll actually be playing with an upstroke. Also, this is a C natural, which doesn't fit in our key, but you can just think about this as kind of a bluesy chromatic note. Also, same idea with your right hand on the 7th measure, where we have this upstroke hammer-on. So when you're ready, let's try this A section once together a bit slower with the transcription on screen. Onto that crazy B part now, right? But things are actually pretty similar to how they were in the A section. We still have a standard 8-measure format, 2-measure phrases. The chord progression is almost identical. All we're changing in this department is we're adding in that B flat chord instead of the A over the second phrase here. But the melody kind of gets all slippy in this part. And to start off, we're changing up that pickup phrase into the downbeat of the section with an F natural going to an F sharp on an upstroke. Next, you'll notice that we have some G sharps in the first and the third phrases here as well. And it's not exactly like we're changing keys here. This is more of a chromatic passing phrase to get you from one place to the next. We're also throwing in some more upstroke hammer-ons in these phrases, as well as the last phrase like we did in the A section. And lastly, when you get to the melody on that B flat chord, that's where things get really interesting, because in order to accommodate for this chord that doesn't fit within our key, we're actually gonna have to change keys and change scales all together, but a bit more on that later. For now, just think about that chromatic motion from the B natural to your B flat on your first finger on the A string, and then watch out for the F natural that we have on the first fret of the E string as well. But after this phrase, we're kind of back to our regularly scheduled program of D major for the rest of this section. All right, I know that's a lot to take in, but let's just take a stab at this nice and slow. Well, our next step is to figure out how to improvise over this tune now, and this is where things are gonna start to get really heady. And just a disclaimer here, if you don't understand all this theory stuff that I'm talking about, it's totally okay, because you don't really need to understand the mechanics of what's going on to be able to implement some of these shapes to start improvising here. And to start, let's do some scale analysis to see what groups of notes we're working with here. And basically what we're doing is we're narrowing down our note choice options little by little to see what notes are gonna work best at any given point in this tune. First up, if you're coming to improvising for the very first time, a great place to start is just to learn the D major pentatonic scale. Here's that scale in 2 octaves, so try to familiarize yourself with this shape. If you're familiar with the pentatonic shape, you'll know that you can combine these 5 notes together in any way that you want to, and it's gonna sound pretty good for the majority of the tune, except for those 2 measures where we have that B flat chord. If you look closely at the notes in the scale, you'll notice that we have a B natural and an F sharp, which are the 2 notes that we altered in the melody for that B flat passage. So automatically you can kind of rule out those notes as options here. All right, the next step here is to see if we can find the full 7 note scales that go along with each chord in this tune. And let's start off with the D major scale. Here's another 2 octave scale shape to get under your fingers. So here's what I want you to think about. Obviously, this scale is linked to that D major pentatonic shape, right? We're just adding in the G and the C sharp notes to get that full 7-note scale. So you could use this scale anywhere you wanted to use the D major pentatonic shape to improvise over this tune. Pretty much anywhere besides that B flat chord, right? But I want you to specifically think about this scale as being linked to the D major chord. So whenever you're improvising over your D major chord, think D major scale. Next, whenever you're improvising over your A major chord, try thinking about this 2-octave A mixolydian mode. So already you might be noticing that these are the exact same notes that we worked on for the D major scale, but we're just starting and ending on your A note instead of your D note now. And the reason why this might be helpful is because it's always helpful to relate the notes of your scale back to the chord that you're playing over. In other words, by starting and ending the scale on A instead of D, you're prioritizing the notes that fit with that A major chord. But yet again, we can't really use this A mixolydian scale over that B flat chord. So finally, we have to learn this crazy B flat Lydian mode to play over that B flat phrase. Here's a 2-octave version of that scale. Pretty weird, right? This is actually a mode of the F major scale, which seems really far away from D major to start with. But you'll notice that we're kind of using the same notes that we have in the F major key signature. We're just starting and ending on a B flat note, again, to reframe those notes since we're playing it over a B flat chord. Now you might be asking, like, how on earth did I arrive at that conclusion, right? And the full answer might be a little bit too long for this video here, but basically what I did was start with the D major scale and think about what mode out there that's centered around a B flat major chord would involve the least amount of changes from that starting place. And B flat Lydian just so happens to be that mode because we're only having to alter our B, our C sharp, and our F sharp notes. Whereas if we were to use our regular B flat major scale here, we'd also have to alter our E note to E flat, or if we're using B flat Mixolydian, we'd also have to alter our A to A flat. And both the B flat major scale and the B flat Mixolydian mode don't sound quite as nice to my ears for this particular phrase, but you really got to follow your nose. You got to try a bunch of stuff out and see what works, see what doesn't. I know it's complicated, and if none of that theory stuff makes sense right now, that's totally okay. Our main goal here is to get you improvising over this tune, and the best way to do that is just to memorize all these scale shapes and associate them with the 3 chords that we have in this song. So you've got these scales down, but now we're gonna narrow our note choices even further, because we're not just gonna think about the key and the scale that we're playing with, but we're also gonna think about what notes are in the chords that we're playing over at any given point in the song. A good improviser is supposed to play along with the chord changes, if that makes sense. And the best way to do that is to locate the chord tones for each chord in the song by playing the arpeggios that go along with those chords. So let's find those notes that we have in our D major chord. And the process goes something like this. You start with your mother scale, so D major here for this instance, and then you find the root note and just take every other note on the scale. So here we have the root, the third, and the fifth, which are respectively D, F sharp, and A. But I personally like working with 7th arpeggios because it gives a little bit extra harmonic information, and it just works out a little bit more evenly in 4/4 times since you'd be working with 4 notes in your arpeggio. So let's go one step further and add the C sharp to this arpeggio to make a D major 7 arpeggio. Nice, so now we're gonna do the same thing with the other 2 chords. For that A chord, we're gonna use our mother scale of A Mixolydian, start with A, count up every other note on the scale, and we're left with A, C sharp, E, and G to make the A dominant 7th arpeggio. Check it out here. And lastly, for B flat, take that B flat Lydian mode, start with B flat, count up every other note. Now you have B flat, D, F, and A for your B flat major 7 arpeggio. Here it is. Again, don't worry too much about the theory stuff if this doesn't make sense right now. Just try to commit these shapes to memory and associate them with those chords. And a great way to do this is actually play the arpeggios along with the form of the song. Let me show you what I mean here. This is an awesome way to kind of map out the harmonic territory for a song. Basically, you're learning the target notes that you might want to start or end a melodic phrase on when you're improvising. So let's try this out. For the A section, we're starting out with that D major 7 arpeggio for the first 2 measures, but before we get back down to the low D of that arpeggio, we're switching gears to play the A dominant 7th arpeggio for the next 2 measures. Same idea on the next line, but we're only playing 1 octave of the A dominant 7th and then 1 octave of the D major 7th at the end to fit in within that framework of the song. Let's give this a go. All right, the B section is the same idea. All we're doing is throwing in that B flat major 7 arpeggio over the B flat chord, but let's try this out together too. So if you made it this far into the video, you're even hipper than I thought because you've endured that onslaught of mind-bending technique and theory to actually making your own music over this tune, and that's what we're gonna do right now. Now the tough part is actually condensing that massive amount of information to finding a useful way of playing something that sounds good over this tune now, right? But if you're up for it, I'd say just don't think about it too much. Just go off the rails, see what you can come up with using these scales and arpeggios as your starting place. But if you're at a loss for where to start on this, I'd say here are 2 improv challenges that might be helpful to get things rolling. First, See if you can improvise using only quarter notes. No other rhythms, no longer gaps between the notes, just downstroke quarter notes. And to make things even more structured here, let's see if we can play chord tones on the first and the third beats of every measure. That way we're really reinforcing the harmony on the stronger rhythms here. And then on the second and the fourth beats, you can use other notes from your arpeggios and scales to connect the dots. And another stipulation here is that we can't play continuous notes on the same pitch because that would be cheating, right? So just remember to associate the right arpeggios and the right scale with the right chord at the right time. I know that's a lot, but just think whenever you see that D major chord, it's a D major scale, D major 7 arpeggio. That A chord, it's an A mixolydian mode and the A dominant 7 arpeggio. And then the B flat is the B flat Lydian mode and the B flat major 7 arpeggio, if that's not too much to keep straight. So here's what this would sound like for the A section. Now I'll leave this up to you to try this on your own, but a great way to practice this is with those backing tracks. That way you can hear what you're improvising against the context of the chords and the structure of the song. And we've got those over on Patreon. Be sure to check it out if you haven't already. Now on to the second challenge, which is the exact same idea, but now we have to use all eighth notes. So no other rhythms, no pause in that steady stream of eighth notes, no repeated notes on the same pitch as well. This one's actually pretty challenging. And we'll still try to play chord tones on beats 1 and 3 and then connect all those notes together with the scales and the arpeggios as well. Let me show you how this would work over the B section now. Well, my fellow fiddle tune hipster friends, you've earned quite a badge of honor by making it to the end of this video. And these are just starting places for your improvisational journey, but you're well on your way to being able to improvise new ideas over this tricky little tune. Well, let me know what you think in the comments below here. And if you're looking for more fiddle tune lessons and more improv ideas in this genre, be sure to check out the other videos that you see here on screen. And thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.